Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. The big topic of the day, the big topic of the week, I would argue across sports, is the situation and circumstance surrounding college football. I told you on Tuesday's show that, the SEC, frankly, as a league, was on the brink of, basically essentially missing this whole week. At the time, Sam Pittman had just tested positive for COVID. LSU was having issues. Texas A&M was having issues. And Mississippi State had so many issues that they canceled their game with Auburn on Monday. And since then, the college football scene has only gotten worse. LSU is officially out against Alabama. Way too many positives in that program. Texas A&M had to postpone against Tennessee because of contact tracing. Missouri, out of nowhere, had to postpone because of contact tracing. So now, Auburn, Mississippi State off the table. Bama, LSU off the table, which is such a disappointment. A&M, Tennessee, Georgia, Missouri, that's 4 SEC games. And then late Wednesday afternoon, we find out that Ohio State, Maryland is now off the table. And so it's just a very disappointing week for college football. And what I want to talk about is why this is happening and what can we do to avoid similar situations. And I think the answer lies in contact tracing, okay? And before we go any further, I want to make everything abundantly clear that I have, frankly, since June, July, August, when we started talking about what college football season could look like, as well as college basketball as well. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't claim to be perfect. What I do, however, what you cannot argue about listening to this show, I talk to people across college sports. I hear their frustrations. I listen to them. I try to contextualize them and give you answers to the questions and answers to why stuff is happening. And what I can tell you definitively, beyond a reasonable doubt, is there is so much frustration with the contact tracing in college sports, okay? And so to backtrack, before we go any further, I want to make that abundantly clear, and I also want to make this abundantly clear. If guys are testing positive for the virus, they shouldn't play, right? Like that just makes sense. So a game like LSU-Bama, as disappointing as it was that this game won't be played, LSU has a bunch of positives, and it's not fair to LSU to send sick players out on the field. It's not fair to Bama to then face those sick players. So I'm not saying if somebody is sick, we need to push them out the door and say, go toughen up, Buttercup, and all that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that when you look at the broader picture of what is going on in college sports right now, so many of these games are not getting canceled because of positive tests. So many of them are being canceled because of contact tracing, and I think that is a major important distinction. Obviously, we know what contact tracing is. I'm not going to get into the details, but essentially, if you're in a confined space with somebody who tests positive for a certain amount of time, we have determined that it is that there is a risk that you will, of course, come down with the virus, and so because of that, you yourself are now forced to quarantine and are not allowed to participate in athletics. And on the surface level, that's great, right? Like, we don't want to spread the virus. We don't want to get sick. We don't want this. We don't want that. But at some point, it does feel like these contact tracing rules have to loosen up. And maybe they eventually will. Maybe they will in the perspective of if you look at some place like Alabama, where at the very least Nick Saban, I know it's not contact tracing, but he tested positive, has 3 straight negatives, is allowed to return. I don't know what the answer is with contact tracing, but what I am telling you is we cannot keep going forward the way that we are with college athletics, with this contact tracing situation, or college sports from now until at least the end of the 2020-2021 calendar year is going to be preposterous. And I'll get into that in a minute, but I do kind of want to reiterate what I'm saying here about contact tracing. Again, to reiterate, I'm not saying if guys are sick, send them out on the field. If LSU has 25 positive cases, they can't field a team, that's different. But I was talking to somebody about contact tracing today on Wednesday, as you guys listen on Thursday morning, and I think what we have to remember, just think about it at the most basic level, because this was what this person told me, and I think it was an important kind of contextual thing. He said, Aaron, just think about it at the most basic level, okay? We are no longer canceling games because people are sick. And forget even sick, keep in mind too, a lot of these kids that are testing positive, they don't even know they have it. They're asymptomatic. But that's not why we're canceling a lot of these games. We're canceling these games not because people are sick, not because they're showing symptoms, but because someone was kind of sort of close to someone else who tested positive. And think about it at the most basic level, right? It reminds me of the Allen Iverson practice rant. We're not talking about a game. We're talking about practice. It's the same with this stuff. We're not talking about a sickness. We're not talking about a hospitalization. We're talking about a guy that was kind of near a guy and it's just and that's what we're canceling these games for. Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher said, as of a day ago, or at least as of Wednesday morning, they had 2 total positive cases overall, and one of them wasn't even a player. So one player test positive, one, I believe it was a student manager test positive, but because of contact tracing, Texas A&M has to cancel a game, okay? That feels crazy to me, that one person has tested positive, but enough people were around him that they have to cancel a game. Missouri, same thing. One player tested positive. It decimated an entire position group with contact tracing, and so because of it, we have to cancel an entire game. Just think about it at the most basic level. Missouri has one guy who tests positive who even knows if he's showing any symptoms. But because he was probably in a meeting room with, say, the other cornerbacks or the other safeties or the other running backs, now they can't play a game because these guys were near that guy. Not that they tested positive, that they were near that guy. And I understand that some of you are probably, driving around, shaking your heads, disagreeing. Torres, you don't care about anybody's health. Of course I do. Of course I wish we lived in a utopian society where nobody ever got sick, nobody ever died, nothing bad ever happened. The sun always shined. It was 70 degrees every day. That is not the world we live in, though. And when I look at the broader perspective of college sports going forward from now until, frankly, March, April, May, under the current contact tracing rules, I don't know how we get anything in. And we'll get games in, but the number of games I don't expect to decrease that are being canceled, right? Everyone's making the jokes about Halloween, and I talked about it, and it's all because, Halloween happened on campus. Yeah, that's part of it. But you know what else is part of it? It's cold and flu season. It's cold outside. It's in the 30s, 40s, 50s in some places. I'm not going to lie, I didn't check the weather everywhere, but we got a lot of people that listen to this show in Indiana, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, Nebraska, Kentucky, Tennessee. It gets cold where you guys are, okay? I'm in California. It's 40 degrees at night. 55 during the day. Well, guess what? You know what happens when it gets cold? You stay inside. You know what happens when it gets cold? You're around other people indoors. By the way, it is naturally cold in flu season. So when I'm looking at this situation, I don't see how it gets better. I don't see how this gets resolved. I don't see how we keep people from catching a virus and how any of this gets fixed with the current contact tracing rules that are in place. Again, if you're sick, don't play, right? Not fair to the other team. I get it. I'm just saying the contact tracing rules are so above and beyond that something needs to change. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, and I'm not saying maybe instead of 10 days it should be 5. Maybe instead of 10 days it should be 3 negative tests. I don't know. What I do know is we cannot keep going this way and expect to have games played this fall and winter. Will games get played? Yes, obviously. But I think the volume of games is going to continue to get canceled. Think about college basketball. Think about the number of airplane rides and bus rides and hotels. You're playing 2 games a week. You're playing on top of 2 games a week. You're staying at one of them's on the road. So once a week, you're going on the road. As opposed to college football, where from September 1st to December 1st, you might go on the road 3 times. You're going on the road once a week in college basketball once conference play starts. And this isn't getting better. Because, again, it's cold and flu season. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I know something has to change. And it was funny because I mentioned a minute ago I was talking to somebody in college athletics on Wednesday afternoon. We were kind of just talking does anyone just bite the bullet and say enough is enough, right? Does any conference commissioner just say, look, we respect people's health, we worry, we're concerned, this, that, But we got to move on with life because we can't proceed like this forever. And I'm just curious what happens next. And I would say on top of that, it's only going to get worse again as we enter the winter. And as more people are together for longer periods of time, in a time where people are already getting sick, right? Like that's a thing. I think I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but you know what the number one concern of college basketball coaches over the winter is? Over the winter months? It's not players partying. It's not players having too much fun. This is obviously pre-COVID I'm talking about. It's the flu. And I'm just telling you right now, if we had the COVID policies for the flu that we do for COVID, we would never have college basketball. Like the college basketball season would cease to exist if every player who caught the flu had to be out for 14 days and anyone who was near that person tested or was contact tracing as well. And so I'll just wrap by saying this, man. I don't know what the next steps are, but I am genuinely curious because I do think it is going to have long-term ramifications. I talked about the college basketball season, but what about the rest of football season? Like, let's just go back to football for a second, right? First of all, there's a really good chance that LSU-Bama, one of the marquee games on the entire schedule of college football, just doesn't get played. These two teams don't have a mutual bye week again until December 19th, which is the weekend of the SEC championship game. Alabama is going to be there, and so LSU-Bama might not get played. Now, as a credit to Greg Sankey, two things. One, something I've been talking about since August, he waited until September 26th, but he also built in an extra week into the schedule to have games late in the year. So, for example, Texas A&M Tennessee was moved to December 12th. He also left open the possibility that games could be played on December 19th, which would be the weekend of the SEC championship game. But say, South Carolina, Tennessee, I guess they already played, but fill in the blank versus fill in the blank, they can't play. They could, in theory, play December 19th. He also left open the idea of shuffling around other schedules, which has already happened. If you remember, Kentucky played Missouri, I believe, a week ahead of schedule to kind of flip the schedule so that all the games could get in. But we're at the point now where we're going to miss some games in the SEC. I'm just going to tell you straight up, I think the Big Ten has major problems because if you remember, the Big Ten only had 8 weeks of scheduled games. The 9th week is the conference championship, and you have to play at least 6 games to qualify for the conference championship, right? That's the Big Ten's rule. That's what they decided upon. Well, Purdue's already missed a game. Wisconsin's already missed 2 games. I can't even remember. Wisconsin's already missed a game. 2 games. They missed 2 games. So first of all, Wisconsin's got to get in every other game the rest of the year or their season's done before it even starts. But how about Ohio State? And this is something I've talked about forever, but it's coming to life in real time. I said, Ohio State can do everything right. As Zach Smith, the college football analyst, former Ohio State assistant, told you on this podcast, he said, Ohio State has basically created a bubble on campus. Ryan Day does not leave the facility at Ohio State. The players basically are all taking online classes. But part of it is, not only does Ohio State need to get lucky and not have positives, they also need to make sure their opponents don't have positives either. Well, guess what? Maryland game this week is canceled. Do some math. They had 8 games on the schedule. They're down to 7. Next week gets canceled. Another game gets canceled. They might not qualify for the Big Ten championship game. Then what do you do? What do you do if you're the Big Ten and Ohio State has never had a positive test all year or has never had to shut down all year but doesn't qualify for the Big Ten championship game? I had somebody, I saw this on Twitter, but Ohio State plays Indiana next week. Indiana, of course, is probably the second best team in the Big Ten East outside Ohio State. What if Indiana starts claiming, quote unquote, that they have an outbreak, don't play Ohio State, and all of a sudden Ohio State can't get in enough games for the Big Ten championship game? It's just a fascinating thought, but these are the realities. This is what happened with the Big Ten when the Big Ten decided we're going to wait till October 23rd and we're going to show everybody how seriously we're taking this. And oh, by the way, we're not going to build in any conference extra bye weeks to make up games. Well, guess what? Wisconsin's down to 6 games max heading into that final weekend. Ohio State has 7 now, could be down to 6. What happens then? I'm just telling you, this is not good. I don't have the answers. I understand there's a lot of highly paid people that have a lot of really tough decisions to make, but I'm just telling you, man, this contact tracing thing is real, and it ain't getting any better anytime soon as cold weather comes in, as flu season comes in, as college basketball, when we have a ton of traveling comes in. It's going to be a very, very interesting couple months in college basketball, college athletics in general, and I'm very curious to see what happens going forward.